In today's video, we're going to take you behind the scenes on how we test the effectiveness of saddle pads. What I have here is a BodiTrak pressure sensor mat. It's got hundreds of little electronic sensors that give us feedback on how much pressure is being carried under the saddle and where. What we're going to test today is how a basic square pad compares to a fleece pad and how that compares to a squish pad. So we're going to get separate readings on all three of these pads, crunch the numbers. We're going to give you all the feedback and kind of give you a real analytical perspective on how these different saddle pads handle the pressure under a saddle.
We're first going to establish our baseline, which I originally set up as the square pad in this video, but really it's more of a no pad baseline setup so we can see what kind of improvement we can get when we add a fleece or a squish pad. All three of these tests with the different pad configurations are going to be run in the exact same way. Ashley's going to do one lap of posting trot, one lap of sitting trot, and one lap of canter so we can avoid any potential benefits or negatives between each pad at the specific gait. Then we're going to take that information and crunch the numbers for you later in the video. Here I give Ashley a quick demonstration on how the pad and the software actually works. Now as you watch her ride with the baseline setup, you'll notice there's a lot of orange and red on my computer screen with each stride as she comes down. It's just worth noting because as we move to the other pads, that's going to improve quite a bit. The fleece pad we're using here is a 100% wool fleece. And you can see in those readings that I'm pointing to that we've already seen a pressure distribution upgrade from the first test without any pad. Now we're setting the squish pad on the horse. We're again getting much improved readings from the squish pad over no pad. The real question is going to be, how does the squish pad compare to the fleece pad?
We've got all of our testing done in the field. Now it's time to go back to the office, crunch all the numbers, and I will give you the summary report of what we did today right now. The data is in and I'm about to explain it all to you right now. But before I give you all the actual results, it's important to understand how the data was collected. That way it'll actually make more sense when you see it. So the data is collected in what's called frames, kind of like the frames of a video. So we get about 15 frames per second of riding. And the way that we structured this test is we did one lap of posting trot, one lap of sitting trot, and one lap of canter. That amounted to about a minute of riding per pad and about 900 frames per pad. And that's how we analyzed it. So we had a total of 2,700 data points broken out over the three pad configurations, and that's where the data came from. The two pieces of data we're going to look at are peak pressure and average pressure. Peak pressure is just the absolute maximum pressure in PSI exerted over that entire 1 minute ride. And then average pressure is, as you probably guessed, the average of all the pressure exerted on the horse's back over that test ride for each of the three pad configurations. So these are important for their own reasons, right? So peak pressure is just for the heaviest impact on the horse's back. Then we have average pressure, which from our testing appears to be a more important number. And the reason for that is when you ride a horse, say for 45 minutes, right? You're not just trying to absorb the blow of one heavy impact. What's really happening is a ton of movement, a ton of sort of micro impacts, if you will, over the course of a ride. And we're dampening and adjusting and compensating for that. So the average pressure lets you know it gives you more of like a duration number. Like over the course of a ride, how am I averaging with this pad versus that pad, etc. Because you can see through all of this data, none of the PSI is exceedingly high, right? I don't think any of our data has more than 5 PSI exerted over the horse's back at any point. And for some frame of reference, if I just walked across the ground here in this office, I'd be exerting about 10 PSI per footstep. So hopefully that gives some context there. Now, let's get into the actual data. So I'll put it up on the screen right now. The first column here, you'll see our peak pressure reading, and that is for our baseline setup, our fleece pad setup, and our squish pad setup. and those are 4.3 psi, 4 psi, and 3.67 psi respectively. Now, I should have mentioned, this outputs in third of psi increments. So that's why all these peak numbers are going to be in thirds, just FYI. Then we have the average pressure, which is for the baseline, that is 2.32 psi, for the fleece pad, that is 2.1 psi, and for the squish pad, that is 1.66 psi. So you can see that it kind of cascades down, right? The baseline, which basically is no pad, right? That's the highest of everything. Then we get down to the fleece pad. The fleece pad is a huge step in the right direction over no pad at all. And then as you move to the squish pad, it results in even better numbers for both peak and average. Now to put things in a little bit more perspective and make it a little bit more like real world to understand, I've got some percentages that I think is gonna really help you kind of get a grasp on this, right? So, if you just go from the baseline no pad setup to the squish pad, the peak pressure, like the absolute highest amount of pressure at any point that's going to be exerted on the horse's back, is reduced by 18%. Then we're going to move over to the average column and do a couple of percentages there, right? So we have, if you just go from the baseline no pad setup to a fleece pad, you're gonna see about a 9% improvement in average pressure on the horse's back. Then if you go from the baseline setup of no pad to the squish pad, you'll see a 28% reduction in average pressure over the horse's back. And then when you compare the fleece pad to the squish pad, and if you move from fleece to squish, you'll see that that represents about 21% improvement over the average pressure on the horse's back. I hope this video on this topic was as interesting to you as it was to us when we first started testing this a couple of years ago. And the most important takeaway from here, and I think is this overarching, I guess just objective truth, if you will, is that any saddle pad is better than no saddle pad. And that might sound like so obvious, but the fact is, if you go on the internet, if you go on social media, there's this huge popular narrative that if you have a saddle that fits well, you don't need any additional saddle pad. And that is flat out wrong. It's just wrong. A saddle, no matter how well it fits, can only provide so much cushion. And whether you put in a fleece, a foam, a squish, whatever else under your pad, it's just that much absorption and dampening that wasn't there in the first place. So hopefully this data, this info, at least oops, I'm knocking stuff over here. So hopefully this data passes along that information at the very least, and it probably also shows why we're so passionate about this squish material. I've said this in other videos, but it's really beaten everything we've put it up against. The rider feedback on it is great, and it's really, we've gone all in on squish material. We've got it for Western and English pads. We've discontinued all of the other pads we were selling to exclusively focus in on the squish material because we just believe in it that much. So that's all I have for you in this video. If you have a question, a comment, definitely drop them below. If you think this type of stuff is cool, please subscribe to the channel. It really would help us out. And until I talk to you next time, have a good one.